Saturday morning light slanted through the garage windows, catching dust motes that drifted like lazy snow. Elijah ran the sanding block along the arm of the rocking chair with mechanical precision, following the grain of the oak, feeling the wood smooth out beneath his palm. The chair had occupied his
This is
Saturdays for 3 months
truly a
now.
wonderful
He could
evening,
have
isn't it?
finished it in two
Absolutely, it's
weeks if he'd
perfect.
wanted to, but finishing meant starting something new, and new things required decisions he wasn't ready to make. The smell of sawdust filled his lungs. Some men found peace in church or therapy or long runs through the city. Elijah found it here in the garage behind his rented duplex in Dorchester, where the only voice was the whisper of sandpaper against wood, and the only expectations were the ones he set for himself. The workbench held the accumulated debris of controlled creation. Wood shavings curled like question marks, jars of stain in graduated shades of brown, tools arranged with the precision of a man who needed order in at least one corner of his life. On the far end, half buried under a rag, sat a photograph in a simple frame. Miriam, 7 months pregnant, her arm looped through his, both of them grinning at the camera while someone from the Boston Architecture Society handed Elijah a crystal obelisk engraved with Young Architect of the Year, 2018. He'd stopped looking at the photo directly about 2 years ago, but he knew it was there. The way you know where every scar on your body lives, even when you can't see them. The garage door creaked. Elijah didn't look up. He knew the sound of Zora's footsteps, could tell her mood from the weight of her heels on concrete. This morning, she walked with purpose, each step deliberate. "You've been ignoring this for 2 weeks, Papa." Her voice carried the particular tone of an 8-year-old who had decided she was done being patient. Elijah kept sanding. The wood was already smooth, had been smooth for weeks, but his hands needed the motion. "I'm busy with this chair." Zora moved into his peripheral vision, a small figure in purple leggings and an oversized MIT sweatshirt that had belonged to Miriam. In her hands she held a cream-colored envelope, the kind that announced formal occasions and obligations Elijah had spent 4 years avoiding. "You've been busy with that chair since Christmas." "It's April," the sanding block stuttered. Elijah set it down, bought himself time by examining the chair arm as if discovering some previously invisible flaw. Zora waited. She'd inherited Miriam's patience along with her cheekbones and her inability to let things go. "Zora, we talked about this." "No, Papa. You talked. I listened. There's a difference." She stepped closer, set the envelope on the workbench next to the photograph neither of them acknowledged. The return address read, Trevor Calloway and Elise Morrison in elegant script. Inside would be an invitation to a wedding Elijah had no intention of attending, a request to celebrate love in a room full of couples while he sat alone and became the subject of whispered speculation and pitying glances. "I can't go to these things." Zora crossed her arms. At 8 years old, she barely reached his elbow, but she had a way of occupying space that made her seem taller. It was a trick Miriam had mastered, the ability to stand in a room and make people pay attention without raising her voice or demanding anything. "You can't hide forever." The words landed like stones in still water. Elijah picked up the sanding block again, needing his hands occupied, needing the rhythm of work to drown out the truth in his daughter's voice. "I'm not hiding. I'm being selective. You're being scared." The sanding block hit the workbench harder than he'd intended. Sawdust puffed into the air between them. Zora didn't flinch. She'd learned early that her father's anger was a flash flood, loud but brief, and it never touched her. Elijah forced his voice level. "Trevor is my friend. Was my friend. We haven't talked in 2 years. I don't belong at his wedding. That's not true, and you know it." Zora opened the envelope before he could stop her, pulled out the invitation with its embossed lettering and formal phrasing. She held it up like evidence in a trial. "Trevor Calloway and Elise Morrison request the pleasure of your company. See? He wants you there. He sent this 3 months ago. You just keep pretending it doesn't exist." Elijah reached for the invitation, but Zora stepped back, held it out of reach with one hand while the other pulled her phone from her pocket. She tapped the screen, turned it to show him a confirmation email. I already RSVP'd for you. Last week. One guest. Elijah Brennan. You're going. The garage tilted, not literally, but in the way the world shifts when you realize you've lost control of something you thought you were managing. Elijah stared at his daughter, at this small person who shared his eyes and Miriam's stubborn jaw, who had apparently decided that passive resistance was over and direct action had begun. You can't just do that. You can't make decisions for me. Yes, I can. Because you never will. She moved closer again, phone still in one hand, invitation in the other, her face set in an expression Elijah recognized from 1,000 bedtimes and homework sessions and moments when Zora had decided she knew better than he did about what was good for him. I notice everything, Papa. Her voice dropped, lost the edge of confrontation, became something softer and more dangerous. I notice when you park 3 blocks away from school so you don't have to walk past the other parents. I notice when you skip my choir concerts because you don't want to sit alone in the auditorium. I notice how you count exits everywhere we go. The grocery store, the library, the park. You're always looking for ways to leave. Each observation was a small cut, precise and surgical. Elijah felt them accumulate, felt the careful architecture of his self-protection crumbling under the weight of being seen by the one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. Zora's eyes were bright now, not quite crying, but close. I look at you every day, Papa. Every single day. And I have never, not once, been ashamed of you. The words hung in the air between them, suspended in sawdust and morning light. So maybe it's time you stop being ashamed of yourself. She set the invitation on the workbench, placed it carefully next to the photograph of Miriam, creating a tableau that felt like an accusation. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, leaving the garage door open behind her, so sunshine flooded in and destroyed the controlled dimness Elijah had cultivated. He stood in the wreckage of his Saturday morning routine, hands still dusted with wood particles, chest tight with the kind of pain that comes from knowing your child understands you better than you understand yourself. The rocking chair sat on the workbench, nearly complete, needing only a final coat of finish that Elijah would probably delay for another month, because completion meant acknowledgement, and acknowledgement meant moving forward, and moving forward meant risking the world again. The invitation stared at him with its elegant typography and its assumption that people still did things like celebrate and gather and exist in public spaces without fear. 1 hour, he thought. I can survive 1 hour. It was a lie, but it was the lie he needed to get through the next 7 days. The week passed in a rhythm of avoidance and preparation. Monday morning, Elijah stood in front of the bathroom mirror practicing phrases that sounded normal. I'm Elijah. I came alone. That's fine. The words felt foreign in his mouth, like a language he'd studied but never spoken. He tried variations, added a smile, removed the smile when it looked like a grimace, settled on neutral politeness, and hoped that would be enough. Tuesday, he called Trevor. The phone rang 4 times before voicemail picked up, and Elijah felt a wash of relief that immediately twisted into shame. He left a message that tried to sound casual. Hey man, it's Elijah. Got the invitation. Congratulations. I'll, see you Saturday. The words sounded stiff even to his own ears. Trevor called back 3 hours later while Elijah was installing cabinet hardware for a client in Cambridge. The conversation lasted 4 minutes and felt like running a marathon through knee-deep water. Trevor's voice had the forced enthusiasm of someone trying to bridge a gap they didn't quite know how to cross. Elijah. Man, I'm so glad you're coming. It's been too long. Yeah. Too long. How's Zora? Good. Great. She's, 8. Growing. That's great. That's really great. Silence stretched between them, filled with all the conversations they hadn't had in 2 years, All the texts Trevor had sent that Elijah had answered with increasing terseness until Trevor stopped trying. So, listen. Trevor's voice shifted, became careful. I know these things can be awkward. Weddings, all the couple stuff. I just want you to know, you don't have to stay long. Come for the ceremony, have a drink, whatever you're comfortable with. The words were meant to be kind. Elijah understood that, but what he heard underneath was, I know you don't fit anymore. I know you make people uncomfortable. I'm giving you permission to disappear. I'll be there, he heard himself say. The whole thing. Trevor's surprise was audible. Yeah? That's great. Really great. Elise will be thrilled. Another pause. You bringing anyone? The question landed like it always did, casual and crushing. No, just me. Cool, cool. Well, I'll put you down for one. See you Saturday. Elijah ended the call and sat in his truck outside the Cambridge brownstone, staring at the phone like it had betrayed him. Through the client's window, he could see a woman arranging flowers on a dining table, her husband coming up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, both of them laughing about something Elijah couldn't hear. The ease of it, the casual intimacy, felt like watching a documentary about a species that had evolved beyond his understanding. Wednesday, he bought the suit. Men's Warehouse in downtown Crossing. Clearance rack in the back where they kept the styles from 2 seasons ago. The salesman was young, probably 25, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to count exits or measure social spaces for safety. Looking for anything in particular? Just a suit. Wedding. The salesman's eyes flicked to Elijah's left hand, noted the absence of a ring, made calculations Elijah could see happening in real time. Yours or someone else's? Someone else's. Cool, cool. What's your budget? Under 100. The salesman's professional smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle recategorization. He led Elijah to a rack of suits in charcoal and navy, pulled out a jacket that was almost the right size. This should work. Good basic cut. Goes with anything. Elijah tried it on in a mirror that showed him what he already knew. He looked like a man wearing a costume, trying to pass for someone who belonged at weddings and celebrations and gatherings of people who still believed in futures. The jacket was too tight across the shoulders. He bought it anyway. Thursday night, he sat at the kitchen table after Zora had gone to bed, a yellow legal pad in front of him, attempting to write something he'd never written before. The header read, Last Will and Testament, in his careful architectural lettering. Below it, nothing. He'd gotten as far as, in the event of my death, 3 times, crossed it out 3 times, each deletion more aggressive than the last. The absurdity wasn't lost on him. He was going to a wedding, not a war zone. But his body didn't seem to understand the difference. His heart rate had been elevated for 3 days. Sleep came in fragments. He'd caught himself running through disaster scenarios. Car accidents on the way to the venue. Medical emergencies during the ceremony. Any act of God that would provide a legitimate excuse not to attend. He abandoned the will, pulled out his phone instead, opened the Notes app where he kept a running list that Zora didn't know about. The header read Documented Incidents, and below it, organized by year, were 44 entries. 2019, Parent-Teacher Conference. Ms. Rodriguez asks, Will Zora's mother be joining us? When informed of Miriam's death, visible discomfort, early meeting termination. 2019, job interview, Hendricks Architecture. Interviewer states, We're looking for someone more polished, despite Elijah having strongest portfolio among 3 candidates. 2020, Church, Couples Bible Study Group, leader suggests single adults group would be better fit, despite topic being general biblical interpretation. 2020, grocery store, security follows Elijah through 3 aisles, does not follow white male shoppers with similar appearance and age. The list continued. each entry a small wound, individually survivable but collectively devastating. He scrolled through them, reading his own documentation of erasure, wondering what the point was of recording things if nothing ever changed. His phone buzzed, a text from Zora's number, even though she was supposedly asleep upstairs. Things to remember. 1. Breathe. 2. 1 hour maximum. 3. Exit is always visible. 4. You are not broken. He stared at the screen, at this message from his 8-year-old daughter who had apparently inherited not just Miriam's cheekbones, but her ability to see through walls and know exactly what someone needed to hear. He texted back, "How are you not asleep?" The response came immediately. "How are you not? Touché. Love you, Papa. You got this." He set the phone down, looked at the abandoned will, looked at the list of incidents, looked at the kitchen where Miriam used to make coffee at 5 in the morning and hum off-key show tunes while scrambling eggs. The house was full of her absence, every room a reminder that the future they'd planned had ended on a rainy October evening when a driver ran a red light and turned Elijah from a husband into a widower, from a partner into a single father, from a man who belonged to a man who counted exits. Friday, he worked. A restoration job in Brookline, refinishing built-in bookshelves for a couple who bickered cheerfully while Elijah measured and sanded and tried to disappear into the wood grain. The wife kept offering him coffee. The husband asked about his family. Elijah gave the answers he'd perfected over 4 years, short enough to be polite, vague enough to end conversation. Just me and my daughter. How old? 8. That's a great age. Does her mother get her on weekends? She passed away 4 years ago. The silence that followed was familiar. The wife's hand went to her mouth. The husband looked away, as if Elijah's grief might be contagious. They stopped offering coffee. He finished the job by 3, collected his check, drove home through Friday afternoon traffic while NPR talked about infrastructure bills and climate change and all the problems of a world that assumed people had partners to discuss them with over dinner. Zora was at her friend Emma's house for a sleepover, wouldn't be back until Saturday afternoon. The duplex felt cavernous in her absence. Elijah heated up leftover pasta, ate it standing at the counter, washed the single dish, dried it, put it away, and stood in his kitchen wondering how it was possible to feel lonely in a space that held so many memories of not being alone. He climbed the stairs to his bedroom, opened the closet, looked at the clearance suit hanging next to work clothes and the one good jacket he wore to client meetings. Tomorrow, when 20 hours from now, he would put on that suit, drive to Harborview Estate, walk into a room full of couples, and try to remember how to be a person who existed in public without apologizing for taking up space. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Zora. Don't forget. Bigger than the sky. It was what Miriam used to say. When Zora was learning to walk and fell and cried, and Miriam would scoop her up and say, "You're bigger than the sky, baby girl." When Zora started kindergarten and was terrified and Miriam held her face and said, "You're bigger than the sky." When Miriam was in the hospital, those last hours, and she'd looked at Elijah with morphine-glazed eyes and whispered, "Take care of our girl. She's bigger than the sky." The phrase had become Zora's talisman, her way of saying she could handle things that scared her. And now she was throwing it back at him, reminding him that fear didn't have to be permanent. He texted back, "Bigger than the sky." Then he set an alarm for 7 a.m., lay down fully clothed on top of the covers, and tried to convince his nervous system that Saturday was survivable. Harborview Estate sat on a peninsula in Boston Harbor, with views that cost extra and a reputation that made it the venue of choice for couples who wanted their wedding to announce something about their success. The building was early 20th century, renovated with the kind of careful attention to historical detail that Elijah's architectural training made him notice even through his rising panic. He arrived at 2:37 for a 3 o'clock ceremony, late enough to avoid the pre-wedding mingling, early enough that his absence wouldn't be noted. The parking lot held rows of cars that spoke to the guest list's tax bracket: Audis and Lexuses, and one Tesla with a vanity plate that read "Funded." Elijah sat in his 14-year-old Camry with the check engine light that came on whenever it felt like it, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing like he'd just run sprints. His suit felt even tighter than it had in the store. The collar of his shirt, bought at Target 3 years ago, bit into his neck. Through the windshield, he watched couples walk toward the entrance. They moved in a choreography he'd forgotten, hands clasped, bodies angled toward each other, conversations flowing with the ease of people who knew they belonged. A woman in a blue dress laughed at something her date said. A man in a gray suit held the door for his wife. An older couple, probably in their 60s, walked with linked arms and the comfortable silence of decades together. Elijah counted them. 43 couples entered the building in the 12 minutes he sat in his car. Not one person walked in alone. His phone showed 2:51. 9 minutes until the ceremony started. If he waited until 2:59, he could slip in during the processional, find a seat in the back, be invisible. The passenger door opened. Elijah's head snapped around, adrenaline spiking, hand moving automatically to the door lock that hadn't engaged. A valet stood there, young and white and smiling with the professional friendliness of someone paid to make guests feel welcome. He held out his hand expectantly. "Keys?" Elijah stared at him. "I'm sorry?" "Your keys, sir. I'll park it for you." Understanding arrived with a familiar wash of humiliation. The valet had seen Elijah sitting in the parking lot and assumed he was staff, not a guest in a cheap suit arriving alone, but someone who worked here, someone whose presence needed to be managed. "I'm a guest." The valet's smile didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, a micro-expression of recalibration and embarrassment. "Oh, my bad. You were sitting here, and I thought, we have some of the catering staff parking, and I just assumed—" The explanation trailed off. Elijah filled in the rest in his mind. "I assumed because you're black and sitting alone in an old car that you couldn't possibly be here for the wedding. It's fine." "No, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's fine." Elijah got out of the car before the valet could apologize further, locked it manually because the key fob had stopped working 6 months ago, and walked toward the entrance with his shoulders squared and his jaw tight, and the certain knowledge that this was how the afternoon would go. Small cuts. Constant recalibration. The exhausting work of existing in a space that didn't expect him. The entrance hall was all marble and crystal, architecture designed to make people feel small and impressed simultaneously. A sweeping staircase led to the second floor where the ceremony would be held. A woman in a black dress stood at the base with a clipboard, checking names against a list. "Name, please?" "Elijah Brennan." She scanned her list, found him, made a small mark. "You're at table 18. The seating chart is in the reception hall, but that's after the ceremony. Head upstairs. Any seat is fine." The ceremony hall was already 3/4 full. Rows of white chairs faced a flower-draped arch with the harbor visible through floor-to-ceiling windows behind it. Elijah scanned the room from the doorway, cataloging exits with the automatic assessment of someone who'd been doing it for 4 years. Main entrance behind him, service door to the left, emergency exit to the right with the glowing red sign. 12 steps. He counted them twice to be sure. Every chair he could see was occupied by couples. They sat close together, whispered to each other, held hands or programs or each other's arms. The sound was a low murmur of intimacy. 200 people who had come with someone and belonged to someone and fit into a social structure that Elijah had been excised from. He moved along the side wall, aiming for the back row, and found the last 3 chairs occupied by a family of 5 who'd apparently arrived late and claimed whatever space remained. He stood there, trapped between retreating and drawing more attention to himself, by searching for another seat, when a woman 3 rows up turned and caught his eye. She was perhaps 60, white hair styled with careful precision, wearing a dress that cost more than Elijah's car. She looked at him with the expression of someone encountering an unexpected element in a carefully planned event, then leaned to the woman next to her and whispered something behind her hand. Both women looked at him. The second one whispered to a third. 3 sets of eyes tracking him like he was a puzzle to solve or a problem to manage. Elijah found a seat in the second-to-last row, squeezed past a couple who had to move their legs to let him by, sat down in a chair that put him on the aisle where anyone looking back would see him immediately. His hands found the program on the seat, gripped it harder than necessary. The paper crumpled at the edges. The couple to his left were in their 30s, the man's hand resting casually on the woman's knee, both of them leaning into each other with the unconscious ease of people who knew how their bodies fit together. The couple to his right, older, maybe 50s, sat with linked arms and matching expressions of pleasant anticipation. Elijah sat alone, hands folded, program crumpled, counting his breaths and reminding himself that 1 hour was 60 minutes, was 3,600 seconds, and he could survive 3,600 seconds of anything. The processional music started. Everyone stood. Elijah stood. The wedding party entered. Groomsmen in gray, bridesmaids in champagne-colored dresses, Trevor looking nervous and happy at the front with the officiant. Then Elise, the bride, walking down the aisle with her father, and the room filled with the collective sigh of people witnessing love and feeling validated in their own choices. Elijah watched Trevor's face as Elise approached, saw the naked emotion there, the tears starting before she even reached him, and felt something twist in his chest. Not jealousy exactly. More like grief for a version of himself that used to understand what it felt like to look at someone and know they were your future. The ceremony was traditional. Vows written by the couple, read with trembling voices, rings exchanged, the officiant pronouncing them married, the kiss that made everyone applaud. Elijah clapped too, the sound hollow in his own ears, and watched Trevor and Elise walk back down the aisle as husband and wife, followed by the wedding party, followed by rows of coupled guests filing out to cocktail hour. He waited until the room was nearly empty before standing, let the crowd thin so he wouldn't have to navigate through clusters of people congratulating each other on being invited. The hallway outside led to a reception hall where the tables would be set up, where table 18 waited with his name on a card and whatever other guests had been assigned to sit with the man who came alone. A hand on his shoulder stopped him. He turned, found Trevor standing there, still in his ceremony glow, Elise a few steps behind, talking to someone Elijah didn't recognize. "You came!" Trevor pulled him into a hug before Elijah could prepare for it, the kind of embrace that assumed continued intimacy despite 2 years of distance. Elijah's arms came up automatically, patted Trevor's back with the awkward rhythm of someone who'd forgotten how to do this. "Of course I came. Congratulations, man. It means a lot. Really. I know it's been weird between us, and I'm sorry for that. I should have called more after Miriam. I just didn't know what to say, and then time kept passing, and Trevor, it's okay. This is your day. Go enjoy it." Trevor stepped back, studied Elijah's face with an expression that held too much pity for comfort. "You doing okay? I mean, with all this? I know weddings can be hard when I'm what?" The question came out sharper than Elijah intended. Trevor's face shifted, embarrassment and concern mixing into something that made Elijah wish he'd just smiled and nodded and moved on. "I just meant, coming alone. It can feel weird. I wanted to make sure you're comfortable. I'm fine. Go find your wife." He said the last word with emphasis, a reminder that Trevor had other obligations, and watched relief cross his friend's face at being released from this conversation. Trevor squeezed his shoulder once more, rejoined Elise, and disappeared into the cocktail hour crowd. Elijah stood in the hallway, breathing through the tightness in his chest, and realized he'd been at the wedding for 47 minutes and already wanted to leave. The reception hall was decorated with the same careful attention to detail as everything else. Round tables with white linens, centerpieces of flowers that probably cost more than Elijah's monthly rent, place cards in elegant calligraphy marking where everyone belonged. He found table 18 easily because it was exactly where he'd expected it to be. In the back, near the service entrance, half hidden behind the same kind of potted fern that had hidden him in the ceremony hall. One woman sat there already, her chair angled slightly toward the emergency exit Elijah had already located. She was mid-30s, black, wearing a burgundy dress that looked expensive without being ostentatious. Her hair was natural, pulled back in a style that required effort Elijah could appreciate, because Zora had taught him about the time and care that went into such things. She didn't look up when he approached, just kept studying the exit with an intensity that suggested she was doing math in her head. Elijah checked his place card. Elijah Brennan. The card next to it read, Vivian Sheffield. He sat down, set his program on the table, and joined her in staring at the exit. They sat in silence while the room filled around them. Other tables received their guests in groups, couples claiming seats and immediately beginning conversations that had probably started in the parking lot and would continue through dinner. Table 18 remained quiet except for the ambient noise of a reception finding its rhythm. Finally, without turning her head, the woman spoke. I counted 2. 12 steps. Her voice was matter-of-fact, as if commenting on the weather or the flower arrangements. Elijah felt something unexpected happen, the beginning of a laugh, rusty and unpracticed, working its way up his throat and emerging as a sound he barely recognized as his own. The woman turned to look at him then, one eyebrow raised in mild curiosity. I'm Vivian, cousin of the bride, the one they didn't know where to put. Elijah, college roommate of the groom, the one who hasn't shown up to anything in 4 years. Vivian nodded as if this information confirmed something she'd already suspected. She picked up her program, set it down again without opening it. MIT, right? Trevor mentioned you once. Something about a ramen incident that ended with the fire department. Despite himself, despite everything, Elijah felt his mouth curve into something that almost resembled a smile. We were trying to make ramen in a coffee maker. It seemed logical at the time. Nothing about college seems logical in hindsight. They fell silent again, but it was different now, less isolating. The table began to fill with other guests. An older couple who introduced themselves as Elise's great-aunt and great-uncle and immediately began a conversation that seemed to pick up mid-argument about optimal retirement savings strategies. A younger woman, maybe 25, who looked at her phone more than the room and offered her name. Jessica, friend of Elise from work, with the bare minimum of social engagement. The final 2 seats remained empty until a server came by and quietly removed the place settings, confirming what Elijah had already suspected. Table 18 was where they'd put the people who didn't quite fit, who'd RSVP'd alone or late or in a way that complicated the careful mathematics of wedding seating charts. Servers began bringing salads. The great-aunt and great-uncle continued their debate about municipal bonds. Jessica scrolled through Instagram. Elijah picked up his fork, set it down, picked it up again. Vivian leaned slightly toward him, voice low enough that only he could hear. First wedding since your wife? The question was direct enough to be jarring, but not cruel. Elijah found himself answering honestly instead of deflecting. First anything in 4 years. I've gotten very good at saying no. Vivian nodded. I've been practicing the opposite, saying yes to things that terrify me. Weddings, parties, anywhere I have to walk in alone and explain why there's only one of me. Husband? Died 3 years ago. Cancer. The words were delivered with the flat precision of someone who'd said them too many times, who'd learned that emotional distance was the only way to get through the conversation without falling apart. I'm sorry. Me too. They ate their salads in silence. Around them, the reception found its volume, toasts beginning at the head table where Trevor and Elise sat surrounded by their wedding party. Elijah forced himself to pay attention, to smile at the appropriate moments, to clap when everyone else clapped. But his awareness kept drifting to the table 3 feet to his right, where 4 women in their 40s and 50s sat watching him with the kind of attention that made his skin prickle. He caught fragments of their conversation, voices pitched just loud enough to carry. "That's Trevor's friend from college, right? MIT roommate, I think." Constance would know. "The one whose wife died?" "Car accident, I heard. 4 years ago. Left him with a daughter." The women lowered their voices but kept glancing over, and Elijah felt the familiar weight of being observed, catalogued, discussed. He forced himself to keep eating, to maintain the appearance of someone who couldn't hear or didn't care, even though every word landed like a small stone thrown at glass. Vivian's hand appeared in his peripheral vision, setting her water glass down with enough force to make ice rattle. She was looking at the same table Elijah had been trying to ignore. "They've been doing that since we sat down." Her voice was carefully neutral, but underneath it ran something harder. "Doing what? Watching you. Talking about you. Deciding what your presence means and how it reflects on them." Elijah set down his fork. His appetite, already minimal, had vanished completely. "You get used to it." "No, you don't. You just get better at pretending you don't notice." She was right. He knew she was right. 4 years of pretending not to notice had left him hollowed out, existing in smaller and smaller spaces, counting exits and avoiding eye contact, and teaching his daughter through his actions that being different meant being less. The main course arrived in waves of synchronized service, servers appearing at each table with plates of salmon or beef tenderloin, the kind of choreographed hospitality that cost $200 a head. Elijah had lost track of how long they'd been sitting there. Time moved strangely when you were trying to be invisible, minutes stretching into geological epochs, while conversations flowed around you like water around a stone. Vivian cut her salmon into precise squares, ate methodically, her attention seemingly on her plate, but her awareness clearly elsewhere. Elijah recognized the performance. He'd been doing the same thing for years, the careful maintenance of normal while your nervous system screamed for escape. The table to their right had moved on from whispering about Elijah to a discussion of real estate values in Brookline. But their eyes still drifted over periodically, tracking him the way people track anything that doesn't fit expected patterns. One of them, a woman in a green dress with silver jewelry that caught the light, leaned toward her companion and spoke behind her hand. Both women glanced at Elijah, then away, then back again. After Vivian's confrontation Saturday night and Zora's message, Elijah understood something had shifted. The question was whether it would last past Sunday morning. Sat down, picked up her water glass with a hand that trembled so slightly only someone watching closely would notice. The reception struggled back to life. Conversations restarted at lower volumes. The MC, a cheerful man in a gray suit who'd been about to announce toasts, stood at the microphone, looking uncertain about whether to proceed or wait for the tension to dissipate further. Elijah sat down slowly. Zora had told him during the reception about Mrs. Callahan's comment, about working alone while other kids laughed. The memory burned fresh. Just some people who don't understand. It's not important. Zora's face on the screen was doing that thing it did when she was trying not to cry, her jaw set, her eyes too bright. "Papa, did that happen because you went alone?" The question was a knife sliding between ribs. Elijah leaned against the corridor wall, phone gripped too tight. "Sometimes people don't know how to act around someone who's different. Is that what happened to me at school, with Mrs. Callahan?" The question came out of nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Elijah's mind went blank, then flooded. "Mrs. Callahan, Zora's teacher. What happened at school? What are you talking about? Last week, the science project. Mrs. Callahan partnered everyone except me." Zora's voice was matter-of-fact now, delivering information she'd clearly been holding on to, waiting for the right moment or the right question. She said I should work alone because I'm probably used to it anyway, with just you and me. The other kids laughed. The corridor tilted. Elijah pressed his free hand against the wall, needing something solid. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd want to hide more. The words came out fierce despite the tears now sliding down Zora's face. You'd stop going to school things and parent meetings and you'd just get smaller and smaller and I'd learn to be small too, but Papa, I don't want to be small. I want to fix it. Elijah couldn't breathe properly. His daughter, 8 years old, had been carrying this alone for a week because she was protecting him from his own fear. Baby, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, just don't run away. Not from the wedding, not from anything. Please. Her voice cracked on the last word. Elijah heard Emma's mom in the background asking if everything was okay. Zora wiped her face with her sleeve, trying to compose herself. I have to go. Emma's mom is worried. But Papa, fix it, for both of us. The screen went dark. Elijah stood in the service corridor with his phone in his hand and the certain knowledge that he'd failed his daughter in ways he was only beginning to understand. He'd thought he was protecting her by withdrawing, by teaching her to avoid conflict, by modeling how to survive in a world that didn't accommodate them. Instead, he'd taught her to shrink, to accept less, to expect that her family structure made her something people would mock. The sound of the MC's voice drifted through the doors. Toasts were beginning. Elijah needed to go back to his table, needed to sit through whatever came next, but his legs didn't want to move. The wall was solid and cool, and if he stood here long enough, maybe everyone would forget he existed, and he could slip out through the service entrance and drive home and hold his daughter and figure out how to undo the damage he'd been doing for 4 years. The door opened. Vivian stepped through, saw him, stopped. Your daughter? Elijah nodded, not trusting his voice. Is she okay? No, neither am I. Vivian moved closer, not touching but present in a way that felt like an anchor. What happened? Elijah told her. About Mrs. Callahan, about the science project, about Zora working alone while other kids partnered up and laughed at the girl whose family didn't look like theirs. The words came out disjointed, anger and grief mixing into something that tasted like failure. When he finished, Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice low and deliberate. My daughter is 16. Her name is Naomi. Last month, she came home crying because a boy asked her to prom, then uninvited her when he found out her dad was dead. His parents thought it would be too complicated to have photos with just one set of parents. Elijah looked at her, really looked, and saw the same exhaustion he felt mirrored back. We're teaching them to accept this. Vivian nodded. Every time we shrink, every time we hide, every time we count exits and plan escapes, we're showing them that being different means being less. So, what do? Vivian straightened, something shifting in her posture. We stop accepting it, we document it, we make it visible, and we demand better. The door opened again. Trevor appeared, looking worried and apologetic in equal measure. Hey, man, everything okay? I saw you leave and I wanted to check. His eyes went to Vivian, recognized her from the confrontation, seemed to recalculate what was happening. Elijah felt something crystallize in his chest. Not anger exactly. Purpose. Trevor was a good person. Kind, well-meaning, genuinely concerned. And he'd still seated Elijah at the table in the back, had still assumed Elijah would be more comfortable hidden, had still treated him like a problem to be managed rather than a friend to be included. Trevor, why did you put me at table 18? Trevor blinked, confusion crossing his face. What? The seating chart. Why table 18? In the back, behind the plant. I thought you'd be more comfortable there, away from, all the couple stuff. So you hid me. No, I was trying to help. I didn't want you to feel awkward. Elijah took a breath, felt Vivian's presence beside him like reinforcement. We were roommates for 4 years. Best friends. You were at my wedding. You held Zora when she was 3 days old. I was the same person then that I am now. The only thing that changed was Miriam died. Why does that mean I get hidden? Trevor's face went through several expressions, landing on something between shame and defensiveness. I didn't know what else to do. After Miriam, you stopped answering calls. You never came to anything. I invited you to my engagement party, to 3 dinners, to a baseball game. You said no every time. So I figured maybe you needed space. Maybe being around couples was painful. I was trying to be respectful, by erasing me, by not forcing you into situations that might hurt. The logic was sound. Elijah recognized that. Trevor had made decisions based on Elijah's own behavior, his own patterns of avoidance. But somewhere in the translation from care to action, something had gotten lost. I needed you to keep trying, to treat me like I still mattered even when I acted like I didn't. Trevor's eyes went bright. He nodded, once, sharp. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. What can I do? Elijah looked at Vivian, who gave a small nod of permission for whatever he was about to propose. First, tell me who made the seating chart. Trevor hesitated. Constance, Elise's aunt. She's been planning weddings for 30 years. She had very specific ideas about how things should be arranged. Where is she? At table 4. Why? Because Vivian and I need to talk to her. The 3 of them walked back into the reception. The MC was mid-toast, reading something from a card about love and commitment and finding your person. Elijah barely heard it. His attention was fixed on table 4, where a woman in her 50s sat with impeccable posture and an expression of serene confidence in her own judgment. Constance Whitmore had clearly heard about the earlier confrontation. Her face showed polite coolness as Elijah and Vivian approached, Trevor trailing behind, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Elijah Brennan. I wanted to ask you about the seating arrangements. Constance set down her champagne glass with deliberate care. Is there a problem? Why did you put all the single guests at table 18? It was a practical decision. We had an odd number of solo attendees, and grouping them together made the most sense mathematically. Vivian stepped forward. Mathematically. Not socially, not in terms of making people feel welcome. Mathematically. Constance's expression hardened. I've been planning events for 3 decades. I know how to make guests comfortable. Singles tend to feel more at ease with other singles rather than being surrounded by couples. Did you ask us? I'm sorry? Did you ask any of the single guests whether we'd prefer to be segregated, or did you just decide for us that we needed to be managed? The table around Constance had gone silent. Her husband, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, put a hand on her arm. She shook it off. I don't appreciate being ambushed at my niece's wedding, and I don't appreciate being treated like a problem that needed to be solved. Elijah's voice was calm, but underneath it ran steel he hadn't known he still possessed. You put us in the back, behind a plant, as far from the head table as physically possible. You seated us with people who had nothing in common except that we didn't come with a date. You made us invisible. That wasn't my intention, but it was your impact. Constance stood, drawing herself up to her full height. Young man, I have been nothing but gracious. If you're uncomfortable, that's regrettable, but your discomfort is not my responsibility. Actually, it is. Vivian's voice cut through the mounting tension. When you plan an event and make decisions that exclude people, that actively harm them, you become responsible for that harm. Intention doesn't erase impact. Constance's face flushed. I think you should leave. No. Elijah heard himself say the word before he'd consciously decided to speak. It came from somewhere deep, some part of him that Zora had awakened on the phone, that Vivian had activated by standing up, that 4 years of disappearing had finally compressed into something solid. No, I was invited. I have every right to be here. And I'm not leaving until I understand why you thought it was acceptable to treat people like they're broken just because they don't fit your idea of what a wedding guest should look like." Constance's mouth opened, closed. Around them, other guests were watching openly now, the pretense of polite non-interference abandoned. At the head table, Elise had her face in her hands. Trevor stood frozen between his friend and his wife's family, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Constance's husband stood, placed himself between his wife and Elijah with the physical positioning of someone diffusing a situation. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately, after the reception, when emotions aren't so high." Elijah felt Vivian's hand on his arm, a gentle pressure that said both, "I'm with you," and "Consider your next move carefully." He took a breath, let it out, remembered Zora's face on the phone, remembered Mrs. Callahan telling his daughter she was used to being alone, remembered 4 years of counting exits and planning escapes and teaching his child that their family was something to apologize for. "Fine. We'll talk after. But I want you to understand something." He looked directly at Constance. "I came to this wedding because my daughter made me promise to stop hiding. She's 8 years old and she's braver than I am. Last week, her teacher humiliated her in front of her class for having a single parent. She didn't tell me because she was afraid I'd withdraw even more. That's what I've taught her, that when the world is cruel, we make ourselves smaller. But I'm done with that. She deserves better. Every kid with a family that doesn't fit your template deserves better." Constance's face had lost its hardness. She looked at her husband, then back at Elijah, and something in her expression shifted. "I didn't know." "No. You didn't ask." Elijah turned and walked back to table 18. Vivian followed. They sat down as the MC, sensing a break in the tension, quickly moved to the next toast. The reception continued around them, but Elijah barely tracked it. His hands were shaking with adrenaline. He'd just confronted the aunt of the bride at her niece's wedding. In 4 years of avoiding conflict, he couldn't remember the last time he'd stood his ground like that. Vivian leaned close, her voice for him alone. That was brave. That was terrifying. Same thing, usually. They sat in silence while the toasts finished and servers began clearing dessert plates. Around them, the reception was building toward dancing, the DJ setting up in the corner, lights dimming for the first dance. Couples were beginning to migrate toward the dance floor, that choreography of partnered movement that Elijah had spent 4 years avoiding. His phone buzzed, a text from Zora. "Emma's mom showed me the wedding website. There's a live stream. I saw you talking to that lady. You didn't run." Elijah stared at the message. There was a live stream. Of course there was a live stream. This was exactly the kind of wedding that would have professional videography and live broadcasting for distant relatives, which meant Zora had watched him confront Constance, had seen her father finally stop disappearing. He typed back, "I promised you I wouldn't." The response came immediately. "I'm proud of you, Papa." Something in Elijah's chest cracked open. He showed the text to Vivian, who read it and smiled for the first time since her confrontation with the watching women. "She sounds like my Naomi. Too smart for their own good." Elijah looked at his daughter's text one more time. "I'm proud of you, Papa." He typed back, "Thank you for not letting me hide." The response came instantly. That's what family does. The MC announced the first dance. Trevor and Elise took the floor while a singer crooned something romantic and timeless. They moved together with the ease of people who'd practiced this, who'd taken lessons and discussed which song and imagined this moment for months. The guests watched with the collective warmth of people witnessing something they believed in. Elijah felt the familiar ache, the one that lived in his chest and never quite went away. He'd had this once. Had held Miriam on a dance floor while people watched and smiled and believed in their future. The loss of it hadn't dulled with time. had just changed shape, became something he carried differently. The MC invited all couples to join the newlyweds. The floor filled with pairs, young and old, moving with varying degrees of grace but unified in their togetherness. Table 18 remained seated. The great-aunt and great-uncle had left after dessert. Jessica had disappeared to the bar. Only Elijah and Vivian remained, watching from their position behind the fern. Vivian stood, extended her hand. "Dance with me." Elijah looked at her hand like it was a test he didn't know how to pass. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because people will talk. People are already talking. At least this way we'll give them something real to discuss." Elijah hesitated. On the dance floor, couples swayed and turned. At table 4, Constance Whitmore was watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. At surrounding tables, other guests glanced over periodically, tracking whether the source of earlier drama would provide more entertainment. That's exactly why we should. Vivian's hand remained extended, patient. "I can't dance. Neither can I. We'll be terrible together." Something about the matter-of-fact absurdity of the statement made Elijah's decision for him. He took her hand, let her pull him to his feet, followed her onto the edge of the dance floor where they would be visible but not central. They moved with the awkwardness of two people who'd been out of practice for years, finding a rhythm that was more survival than grace. Vivian's hand on his shoulder, his hand at her waist, both of them maintaining the formal distance of people who barely knew each other but had somehow become allies. "This is incredibly uncomfortable." Vivian's voice held a note of grim satisfaction. "Good. Comfort is overrated. We're here. We're visible. We're not apologizing." Around them, couples danced with practiced ease. Elijah caught Trevor's eye across the dance floor, saw his old friend's expression of surprise and something that might have been approval. At table 4, Constance leaned toward her husband, speaking behind her hand. "How long do we have to do this?" "Until the song ends, or we decide we're done. Whichever comes first." The song was slow, seemed to stretch infinitely. Elijah focused on not stepping on Vivian's feet, on maintaining the swaying motion that approximated dancing, on breathing through the exposure of being watched by 200 people who were definitely forming opinions about the widower and the widow. Dancing together at a wedding. Halfway through the song, Vivian spoke again. "I've been documenting. For 3 years, every time someone assumes I'm divorced instead of widowed because divorced is easier to process. Every time I'm excluded from events because they're couples only. Every time someone tells me I should be moving on, as if grief operates on a schedule." Elijah met her eyes. "How many incidents?" 27, professionally. Socially, probably double that, but I only documented the ones that affected my work. I have 44. Vivian's expression sharpened. "Documented. In a notes app on my phone. Started keeping track 2 years ago when I realized the patterns weren't coincidence." "What kind of patterns?" "Job interviews where I'm the most qualified candidate, but they choose someone more polished. Parent-teacher conferences where staff assume Zora's mother is just absent, not dead. Church groups that suggest I'd be more comfortable in singles ministry even though I want to study theology, not discuss dating. That's discrimination. That's life as someone who doesn't fit the template." The song ended. Another began immediately, the DJ maintaining momentum. Couples shifted, some leaving the floor, others joining. Elijah and Vivian remained, continuing their awkward swaying because stopping would mean returning to table 18 and acknowledging that the moment had ended. "What if we combined our documentation?" Vivian's question was quiet but intense, showed the pattern, made it undeniable, presented it to someone who could actually do something about it. Like who? The venue, for starters. They're complicit. Constance didn't invent couples-only seating. She learned it somewhere. Probably here. Elijah thought about the service corridor, about the way the venue manager had nodded when he'd overheard Constance discussing appropriate atmosphere. The way spaces actively shaped themselves to exclude people who didn't arrive in matching sets. And if the venue doesn't care, then we go wider. Media, social media. Make enough noise that other people start paying attention to how single parents and widows and anyone who doesn't fit the couple paradigm gets treated. That sounds exhausting. It is, but less exhausting than teaching our daughters to accept being made invisible. The second song ended. Elijah stepped back, releasing Vivian. Around them, couples continued dancing, but he'd reached his limit of exposure, of being watched, of performing normalcy while his nervous system screamed that he didn't belong here. They returned to table 18. Elijah pulled out his phone, opened his notes app, navigated to documented incidents. Showed the screen to Vivian. She scrolled through, her expression growing darker with each entry. When she reached the bottom, she pulled out her own phone, mirrored the gesture. Elijah read entries that could have come from his own life, just with different details. Same patterns, same coded language, same systematic exclusion dressed up as concern or practicality. 71 cases between us, over 4 years. That's not coincidence. That's pattern. Vivian locked her phone. What do we do with it? Elijah looked around the reception. At Constance, who'd offered to talk after but probably expected the conversation to be private. Conciliatory, brief. At Trevor, who'd meant well but still perpetuated harm. At the venue itself, with its elegant architecture and its policies that assumed everyone came in pairs. We start with Constance. Actually talk to her, show her the documentation, see if she's capable of understanding impact versus intention. And if she's not, then we move to Plan B, which is? Elijah pulled up another app on his phone, one he'd been using for client work, something that documented building code violations with photos and detailed notes. He'd walked through Harbor View Estate with professional eyes, had noticed things that might not matter for a wedding, but would matter very much to a fire marshal or building inspector. I used to be an architect. I specialized in public safety codes. This building has 6 violations that I can prove. Occupancy rating, emergency exit access, accessibility features. None of them dangerous tonight, but all of them actionable. Vivian's eyes widened. You're going to leverage building codes to force policy change? I'm going to give them a choice. Change how they treat single guests, or face consequences that affect their business license. That's brilliant. That's necessary. The DJ announced last call for the bar. The reception was winding down, guests beginning to drift toward exits, collecting coats and saying goodbyes. Elijah checked his watch. 9:47. He'd been at the wedding for 6 hours and 47 minutes. His initial plan had been to stay for 1 hour maximum. Constance approached their table, her husband a step behind, both of them looking like people who'd decided to have a conversation they'd rather avoid. Mr. Brennan, Ms. Sheffield, I believe we owe you an apology and a conversation. Elijah gestured to the empty chairs at their table. Sit. They sat. Constance folded her hands on the table, the same gesture she'd probably used in hundreds of event planning meetings, projecting control and capability. I want you to know that I never intended to make anyone feel excluded or less than. My goal with seating arrangements is always to maximize guest comfort. Based on what criteria? The question came from Vivian, sharp and direct. Constance blinked. Excuse me? How do you measure guest comfort? Did you survey people? Ask what they preferred? Or did you make assumptions based on your own biases about what single people need? Constance's composure cracked slightly. I used 30 years of experience planning events. 30 years of excluding people who don't fit your template. Elijah kept his voice level, felt Vivian's presence beside him like reinforcement. You seated every single guest at the last table, behind a plant, away from the center of the celebration. You made us invisible and called it kindness. I thought you'd be more comfortable. You thought we'd be less visible. There's a difference. Constance's husband leaned forward. What would you have preferred? To be treated like everyone else? seated based on relationship to bride or groom, not relationship status, to be included in the celebration, not hidden from it. Constance's face was doing something complicated, cycling through defensiveness and realization and discomfort with being wrong. I genuinely didn't see it that way. That's the problem. You didn't see us at all. Elijah pulled out his phone, opened his documentation app. I've been recording incidents of exclusion and discrimination for 2 years. 44 cases where I was treated differently because I'm a single parent. Ms. Sheffield has 27 professional incidents. Combined, we have 71 documented cases of systematic exclusion. Your seating arrangement is number 72. He slid the phone across the table. Constance read, her expression shifting from defensiveness to something that might have been horror. She passed the phone to her husband, who read and went pale. I had no idea this was so widespread. Because you've never had to notice. You fit the template. Married, partnered, part of the majority. You move through the world assuming your experience is universal. Vivian's voice had lost its edge, become almost gentle. But for those of us who don't fit, these aren't isolated incidents. They're constant. Death by 1,000 cuts. Constance handed the phone back to Elijah with hands that shook slightly. What do you want from me? Acknowledgement, change, a commitment that you'll stop making these assumptions. And if I agree, then we move forward. If you don't, we have other options. Such as, Elijah pulled up his building code documentation. This venue has 6 code violations, none immediately dangerous, all actionable. I can report them to the city, trigger an inspection that will cost the venue thousands and possibly affect their event license. Or I can work with them to fix the issues, help them redesign their spaces and policies to be more inclusive. Their choice. Your choice. Constance stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, a sound without humor. You're blackmailing me with building codes. I'm offering options, same as you offered me an option tonight. Be comfortable in the back where no one has to look at you, or make everyone else uncomfortable by insisting on being visible. Fair enough. Constance sat back, looked at her husband, then at Vivian, then at Elijah. I'll talk to the venue management. Tomorrow. Present your documentation, explain the issues, see if they're willing to implement changes, and if they're not, then you do what you need to do. But Mr. Brennan, Ms. Sheffield, I want you to know that I am genuinely sorry. I thought I was being helpful. I see now that I was being harmful. That distinction matters. It does. Thank you. The conversation ended with handshakes that felt like treaties, temporary and fragile, but real. Constance and her husband left. The reception was nearly empty now, just staff cleaning tables and the DJ packing equipment. Vivian gathered her bag. What happens now? Now we follow through. Meet with venue management. Present the evidence. Demand policy changes. And if they refuse, we go to the press, social media, make enough noise that they have to respond. You know this might not work. We might fight and document and demand and nothing might change. Elijah thought about Zora's face on the phone screen, tears streaking her cheeks as she asked him to fix it. Thought about Mrs. Callahan telling his daughter she was used to being alone. Thought about 4 years of shrinking and hiding and teaching his child that their family was something shameful. Then at least we tried. At least we stopped accepting it. At least Zora and Naomi can see that when the world is cruel, we don't make ourselves smaller. We fight back. Vivian smiled, tired but genuine. My daughter is going to like you. Mine already does. She was watching the live stream. Saw me confront Constance. What did she say? That she's proud of me. The words caught in his throat. Vivian put a hand on his arm, squeezed once. She should be. You were bigger than the sky tonight. Sunday morning arrived with the particular quality of light that comes after storms, sharp and clarifying. Elijah stood in his kitchen watching Zora make pancakes with the fierce concentration of someone performing surgery. She'd been home for 20 minutes, deposited by Emma's mother with a knowing look that suggested she'd heard about the wedding drama through whatever parent network existed in their neighborhood. Zora flipped a pancake with more force than necessary. It landed off-center, edges folding over themselves. Mrs. Patterson told Emma's mom what happened. Emma's mom told me you yelled at someone. I didn't yell. I spoke firmly. Emma's mom said you made the bride cry. That was a consequence, not a goal. Zora turned to face him, spatula still in hand, expression caught between pride and worry. Are you in trouble? Elijah pulled 2 plates from the cabinet, set them on the counter between them. I don't think so, but I have a meeting tomorrow morning that might change things. What kind of meeting? The kind where we find out if standing up for yourself makes things better or just makes things harder. Zora nodded like this was a perfectly reasonable answer, turned back to her pancakes. Elijah watched her small shoulders, the careful way she monitored the griddle, and felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper. Everything he did now wasn't just about him. It was about showing her what was possible, what was worth fighting for, how to exist in a world that would try to make her smaller. His phone buzzed. Vivian's name on the screen. Meeting set for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Venue management. Constance, you and me. Are you ready? Elijah typed back. Define ready. The response came immediately, scared but showing up anyway. Then yes, ready. He pocketed the phone as Zora slid pancakes onto plates, added butter and syrup with the precision of ritual. They ate at the kitchen table where bills still sat in a neat stack, rent notice on top, bank statement underneath. The math hadn't changed overnight. He still had a duplex he couldn't quite afford, work that paid enough to survive but not enough to save, a daughter who deserved more than he could give. But something else had shifted. Some internal architecture that had been crumbling for 4 years had found new support. Zora cut her pancake into exact squares. Papa, what are you going to say at the meeting? The truth. That their policies hurt people. That they need to change. What if they say no? Then we make them listen differently. How? Elijah thought about the building code violations documented on his phone, the leverage he'd discovered by looking at Harbor View with professional eyes instead of defeated ones. Sometimes you need to speak in a language people understand. For this venue, that language is money and liability. Is that mean? Is it mean to protect yourself when someone's hurting you? Zora considered this, syrup pooling around her fork. No, that's just smart. Exactly. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. Elijah washed dishes while Zora sprawled on the couch with a library book about marine biology, her current obsession. The normalcy of it felt fragile, like something that could shatter if he examined it too closely. But it was also real. His daughter reading, Sunday morning quiet, the possibility that tomorrow might bring change instead of just more of the same slow erasure. His phone rang. Trevor's name this time. The conversation started with apologies, Trevor's voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent the night replaying events and recognizing his own complicity. Elise feels terrible. She didn't know what Constance had done with the seating. She thought I'd arranged it. Did you tell her why you seated me there? Silence on the line, which was answer enough. Yeah, I told her. She pointed out that I basically segregated my own best friend because I was uncomfortable with his grief. Trevor's voice cracked on the last word. I'm sorry, man. I was trying to protect you and I ended up making you invisible. Elijah leaned against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to his ear, watching Zora turn pages. I know. That's what makes it complicated. You meant well, but impact matters more than intention. Elise wants to help. Whatever you're doing tomorrow, she wants to be there. She thinks Constance will listen to her, tell her thank you, but this isn't about your wedding anymore. It's bigger than that. I know. That's why we want to help. The offer landed with unexpected weight. Elijah had gotten used to fighting alone, had forgotten what it felt like to have allies who showed up not because they had to, but because they chose to. Okay. Tell Elise she can come. But Trevor? This might get uncomfortable. We're not asking politely. We're demanding change. Good. It's about time someone did. They ended the call with promises to coordinate in the morning. Elijah set the phone down, looked at the documentation he'd been compiling. the building code violations, and the discrimination incidents, and the careful architecture of evidence that might convince a venue to change or might just make him a target for retaliation. Zora appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "Good." Mama always said scared means it matters. The invocation of Miriam hit differently this morning. Less like a wound and more like a memory of strength. She'd been fearless in ways Elijah had forgotten, had spoken up in meetings and challenged assumptions, and refused to shrink even when the world suggested she should. She was right. Scared means it matters. Then it must matter a lot. Because you look really scared. Elijah pulled his daughter into a hug, felt her small frame against his chest, her heart beating steady and sure. "I'm going to fix this. For both of us. I know, Papa. That's why I'm not scared." Monday morning felt like walking toward a verdict. Elijah dressed in clothes that split the difference between contractor and professional, slacks from his architecture days that still fit if he didn't breathe too deeply, a button-down that Miriam had bought him for presentations. He looked in the bathroom mirror and saw someone who was trying to pass for capable, for powerful, for someone who had leverage instead of just desperation and documentation. Harbor View Estate looked different in daylight, less romantic and more institutional. The marble entrance hall that had seemed elegant on Saturday now felt imposing, designed to remind visitors of their place in hierarchies of taste and money. Elijah stood in that hall at 8:57 a.m., phone in pocket, holding 71 documented incidents and 6 building code violations, waiting for the people who would decide whether any of it mattered. Vivian arrived at 8:58, dressed in architect professional with a leather portfolio under her arm. She nodded at Elijah once, the gesture of a teammate before a game. "Ready?" "As much as possible." Constance appeared from a side corridor at 9 exactly, flanked by a man in his 60s who carried himself with the particular confidence of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. He extended his hand. "Roland Thatcher, General Manager. I understand we have some concerns to address." His tone suggested this would be a brief meeting, a formality before returning to actual business. Elijah shook his hand with a grip firmer than necessary. "We have documented systematic discrimination that requires policy change." Roland's eyebrows lifted fractionally. "That's quite an accusation." "It's quite a pattern." They were led to a conference room on the second floor, windows overlooking the harbor, a table large enough for 12 but set for 6. Elise arrived moments later, still looking apologetic, taking a seat next to Constance. Trevor had texted that he'd be late, caught in traffic from Cambridge. Roland settled at the head of the table, gestured for everyone else to sit. "So, let's hear these concerns." Elijah pulled out his phone, connected it to the conference room display system with the ease of someone who'd done this in his previous life. The screen filled with his documentation, 44 entries organized by date and category. "I've been tracking incidents of discrimination and exclusion for 2 years. Job interviews where I'm the most qualified candidate but described as not quite right. Parent-teacher conferences where staff assume my daughter's mother is absent rather than deceased. Social events where I'm excluded from activities designated for couples." He scrolled through examples, let the specificity speak for itself. Dates. Locations. Direct quotes where he had them. The accumulation of small cruelties that individually seemed manageable but collectively formed a pattern of erasure. Roland watched with an expression of studied neutrality. Constance looked increasingly uncomfortable. Elise had her hand over her mouth. "This is clearly distressing for you, but I'm not sure what it has to do with Harbor View." Vivian leaned forward. "Entry number 72, Saturday night, your venue, your seating chart, your policy of segregating single guests." "We don't have a policy of segregation." "Then explain Table 18. She pulled up the seating chart on her own phone. displayed it alongside Elijah's documentation. Every single guest seated at one table in the back of the room, behind decorative foliage, as far from the celebration as possible while still being technically present. That was a practical decision based on available space and guest comfort. Whose comfort? Because it certainly wasn't ours. Roland's neutrality cracked slightly, irritation bleeding through. "Ms. Sheffield, I understand you had some kind of altercation at the reception. From what I hear, you stood up and made a scene. That's hardly the behavior of someone who was made uncomfortable by seating arrangements. I made a scene because I was tired of watching my friend be treated like a problem that needed to be managed. Because your staff, your policies, your entire approach to events assumes everyone arrives in pairs and anyone who doesn't is an inconvenience. That's not true." Elijah switched displays, brought up a different set of documentation. Phone records, email exchanges, conversations he'd recorded with venue staff during the planning process for a client event 6 months ago, before he'd recognized the patterns. 6 months ago, I was hired to design furniture for a client's anniversary party. Your event coordinator asked if the client and her husband needed special accommodations. When I explained I was the designer, not the client's husband, she assumed I was bringing a date. When I said I was coming alone, she suggested I might be more comfortable skipping the dinner portion since it was designed for couples. Roland's face had gone carefully blank. Elijah pressed the advantage. I declined the invitation. Lost a potential recurring client because your staff made assumptions about my personal life and decided I wouldn't fit your aesthetic. That sounds like a misunderstanding. Multiply that misunderstanding by 71 incidents. Add Vivian's 27 professional experiences. We're at nearly 100 documented cases of systematic exclusion. At what point does misunderstanding become policy? The room fell silent. Elise reached across the table, put her hand on Constance's. "Aunt Connie, is this true? Did you seat people that way on purpose?" Constance's composure finally crumbled. "I thought I was being helpful. Singles feel awkward surrounded by couples. I was trying to minimize discomfort by making us invisible." Vivian's voice was quiet but absolute. "By telling us that our presence disrupts the proper order of things, that we need to be managed, contained, kept away from the real guests. I never thought of it that way. That's the problem. You never thought about it at all." Roland cleared his throat, reclaiming control of the meeting. "I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. We'll certainly review our practices and consider whether adjustments are warranted." Elijah recognized dismissal when he heard it. The careful language of someone who planned to do nothing but wanted to appear concerned. He switched the display again, brought up his building code documentation. "Before you decide that consideration is enough, you should know that during Saturday's event I documented 6 violations of Massachusetts building and fire codes." Roland's face went pale. "Excuse me? I'm a licensed architect, former Young Architect of the Year for Boston. I specialized in public safety and accessibility. Your venue is operating at 10% over maximum occupancy rating. Your emergency exits are partially blocked by decorative elements. Your accessibility features don't meet current ADA standards. Your fire suppression system hasn't been inspected in 18 months according to the certificate in your service corridor." He pulled up photos, official code citations, time-stamped documentation that would hold up under scrutiny. None of these violations were immediately dangerous Saturday night, but all of them are actionable. Anyone could trigger a full inspection that would cost you tens of thousands in remediation and potentially suspend your event license during repairs. You're threatening us. I'm offering you a choice." Elijah stood, moved to the windows overlooking the harbor, spoke with his back to the room because it was easier than watching their faces. "You can dismiss our concerns as oversensitivity. File our documentation as complaints from difficult people. Continue operating exactly as you have been. And I'll report these violations to the city by close of business today." He turned to face them. "Or you can implement real policy changes. Written guidelines that prohibit discrimination based on relationship status. staff training on implicit bias and coded language, a commitment to inclusive event planning that doesn't assume couples are the default and everyone else is an aberration. And I'll help you fix the building code issues at cost. Consult on redesigning your spaces to be genuinely accessible. Roland's jaw worked like he was chewing words too bitter to swallow. That's extortion. That's leverage. Same thing you use when you charge premium prices for harbor views and mandatory minimums for weekend events. You've built a business on making people pay for the privilege of using your space. I'm just asking you to make that space actually welcoming to everyone who pays. The silence stretched. Elise broke it first. Do it. Implement the changes. All of them. Elise, this isn't your decision. It was my wedding where people were hurt, where my aunt made choices that caused harm. I won't have Harborview represent me if those choices continue. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet, and Roland clearly recognized the threat of bad publicity from a bride willing to speak publicly about her wedding venue's discrimination. I'll need time to discuss this with ownership. You have 48 hours. After that, my documentation goes to the city. Elijah disconnected his phone from the display, pocketed it with hands that shook from adrenaline. He'd just blackmailed a venue using building codes and the threat of regulatory scrutiny. 4 years ago, he couldn't have imagined being this person. 4 years ago, he'd been someone who avoided conflict and counted exits and made himself smaller every day. The meeting adjourned with stiff handshakes and promises to be in touch. Outside the conference room, Vivian grabbed Elijah's arm. That was incredible. That was terrifying. Still incredible. Elise caught up with them in the hallway. I meant what I said. I'll go public if they don't change. I have 15,000 Instagram followers and most of them are engaged or planning weddings. One post about discriminatory practices and Harborview loses half their bookings. Elijah looked at this woman he barely knew, who'd just offered to weaponize social media on behalf of people she'd never met. Thank you, but you should know this might get ugly. Roland doesn't strike me as someone who accepts losing gracefully. Neither am I. And right now I'm angrier at him than I've ever been at anyone except maybe my aunt. She glanced back toward the conference room where Constance remained with Roland. She didn't mean to be cruel, but she was. And she needs to face that. The hardest cruelties are the ones that come wrapped in good intentions. Vivian's words settled like sediment. They left the venue together. 3 people who'd walked in as strangers or distant acquaintances and emerged as something closer to a coalition. Tuesday morning brought rain, the kind of relentless gray drizzle that made Boston feel like it was slowly dissolving. Elijah drove Zora to school through traffic that moved like cold honey, windshield wipers beating a rhythm that matched his pulse. Papa, what happens if the venue says no? Zora had been quiet all morning, unusual for her. The question confirmed she'd been processing everything, building scenarios in her 8-year-old mind about consequences and outcomes. Then I report the code violations like I promised. They face inspection, possible fines, required repairs, and they'll be mad at you. Probably. Will that be dangerous? The question landed with unexpected force. Elijah had been so focused on the logistics of confrontation that he hadn't considered what Zora might be imagining, what fears a child could construct around her father challenging people with power. No, baby. It won't be dangerous. They can't hurt me for reporting real violations. That's protected by law, but they could hurt you other ways. She was too perceptive. Elijah pulled into the school parking lot, found a spot, turned to face her fully. They could try. They could badmouth me to potential clients. They could make it harder for me to get work. But Zora? I've been making myself smaller for 4 years, trying to avoid exactly that kind of retaliation. And it didn't protect us. It just taught you that being different means being less. I don't think we're less. Neither do I. Not anymore. He walked her to the entrance, watched her disappear into the building where Mrs. Callahan waited with her partnering policies and her assumptions about family structures. He'd scheduled a meeting with the principal for Thursday. Another confrontation. Another demand for change. His phone rang as he reached his truck. Unknown number. Mr. Brennan, this is Felicia Torres, education reporter for the Boston Globe. I heard about an incident at Harborview Estate this weekend, and I'm hoping you might be willing to discuss it. Elijah sat in his truck, rain drumming on the roof, trying to process how a reporter had gotten his name and number within 48 hours. How did you hear about it? I have sources at various venues. Word travels when someone threatens to report code violations unless policies change. The phrasing made him sound like a criminal. Elijah's grip tightened on the phone. That's not an accurate characterization. Then help me understand what did happen. I'm interested in the discrimination angle. Systemic exclusion of single parents and widows from social events. Why? Because if it's as widespread as my sources suggest, it's a story that matters. Particularly in a city with increasing single-parent households and a social infrastructure still built around nuclear families. Elijah thought about 71 documented incidents, about Vivian's 27 professional experiences, about Zora working alone on a paired project while her classmates laughed. I'll talk to you, but not alone. There are others involved who should be part of this conversation. Can you put me in touch? He took down her information, promised to coordinate with Vivian and get back to her within 24 hours. The call ended, and Elijah sat in his truck watching rain blur the windshield, understanding that he'd just crossed another threshold. Talking to a venue manager was one thing. Talking to the press was declaration of war. His phone buzzed. Text from Vivian. Reporter called me too. Felicia Torres. Are we doing this? He typed back. Are you ready for this to go public? Her response came after a pause long enough that Elijah imagined her having the same crisis of doubt he was experiencing. My daughter asked me last night what I was fighting for. I told her I was fighting so she never has to count steps to emergency exits. So, yes, I'm ready. Elijah called Felicia back, set up an interview for Wednesday afternoon. Then he called Vivian and Elise, coordinated schedules, built a plan for how to tell this story in a way that wasn't just complaint, but documentation, evidence, a pattern too large to dismiss. Wednesday afternoon, they met at a coffee shop in Cambridge, neutral territory away from venues and wedding drama. Felicia Torres turned out to be in her 30s, sharp-eyed and carrying a recorder that she set on the table between them, with permission asked and granted. Start at the beginning. How did you recognize this was a pattern and not isolated incidents? Elijah told her about the Notes app, the 2 years of documentation, the moment he'd realized that what felt personal was actually systemic. Vivian added her professional experiences, the careful ways colleagues excluded her from client dinners and networking events that assumed everyone brought a spouse. Elise contributed the bride's perspective, how her aunt's well-meaning interventions had caused real harm. Felicia took notes, asked clarifying questions, circled back to specifics that would make the story concrete. Dates, names, direct quotes, and the building code violations? That seems like an unusual escalation. Elijah leaned forward. I'm an architect. I see buildings differently than most people. When I realized the venue was complicit in systematic discrimination, I looked for leverage. Found it in safety violations they'd rather remediate quietly than face public scrutiny for. So you blackmailed them. I gave them a choice. Fix the discrimination or face consequences for unrelated but legitimate violations. They had 48 hours to decide. Tomorrow's the deadline. Have you heard from them? Not yet. What happens if they refuse? Then I follow through, report the violations. Accept whatever professional consequences come from being someone who challenges people with power. Aren't you afraid of retaliation? Elijah thought about Zora's question in the car, about danger and consequences, and what it meant to stand up when standing up might cost him everything. Terrified. But I'm more afraid of teaching my daughter that fear is a reason to stay silent. The interview continued for 90 minutes. Felicia asked about Miriam, about Zora's school incident, about the specific language Constance had used and the ways exclusion got coded into event planning. She asked Vivian about professional impact, how discrimination affected career trajectory and earning potential. She asked Elise about complicity, about the ways even well-meaning people perpetuate harm. When will the story run? Depends on what happens tomorrow. If the venue agrees to change, it's a story about successful advocacy. If they refuse, it's investigative journalism about systematic discrimination with specific institutional targets. Either way, it's public. Either way, people will know your name and connect you to this issue. Are you prepared for that? Elijah looked at Vivian, who nodded once. Looked at Elise, who met his eyes with determination. Yes. We're prepared. They left the coffee shop as the sun was setting, Cambridge streets filling with students and professionals and couples walking hand in hand toward restaurants and futures. Elijah drove home through traffic, thinking about thresholds and points of no return, about how once you spoke truth to power, there was no unspeaking it. Zora was at the kitchen table doing homework when he arrived, spread out with textbooks and worksheets in organized chaos. She looked up as he entered. How did it go? We told our story to a reporter. It might be in the newspaper. Will people be mad? Some people, other people might finally understand. Which matters more? Understanding. Always understanding. She returned to her homework. Elijah made dinner, chicken and rice that he'd learned to cook because Miriam had made it, and he couldn't bear to lose the taste memory. They ate together while Zora talked about her day, about a quiz she'd aced and a boy who'd gotten in trouble for talking back to the substitute teacher. Normal. Domestic. The architecture of a life built from the wreckage of the one before. His phone buzzed at 8:47 p.m. Email from an address he didn't recognize. Subject line, Harbor View, policy changes. He opened it with hands that had gone numb, read 3 paragraphs of corporate language that boiled down to, they were implementing changes. Written non-discrimination policy. Staff training. Accessibility improvements. All of it documented and scheduled for completion within 90 days. The email ended with a request that Elijah consult on the accessibility upgrades, compensation to be negotiated, code violations to be remediated before any regulatory reports were filed. They'd agreed. He'd won. The realization hit with unexpected force. 4 years of shrinking and hiding and counting exits, and in one weekend he'd challenged an institution and forced change. Not through violence or shouting, but through documentation and leverage and the willingness to follow through on consequences. He forwarded the email to Vivian and Elise. Their responses came within minutes. Vivian, this is just the beginning. Elise, thank you for not backing down. Elijah looked at his daughter, still focused on homework, unaware that the world had just shifted slightly on its axis. Zora, the venue agreed to change their policies. She looked up, eyes bright. Because of you? Because we wouldn't accept less. That's the same thing. Maybe it was. Maybe standing up for yourself and forcing change were identical when you finally stopped separating them into different categories. Thursday morning, Elijah met with Principal Davidson and Mrs. Callahan in an office that smelled like old coffee and had institutional anxiety. He brought documentation of Zora's incident, comparison policies from other school districts, and the calm certainty of someone who'd already won one battle this week. Mrs. Callahan, can you explain your partnering policy for group projects? The teacher shifted in her seat, defensive before he'd even finished the question. I pair students based on complementary skill sets. It's pedagogically sound. And when there's an odd number, I have the remaining student work independently. How often is Zora that remaining student? Mrs. Callahan's face flushed. I don't keep statistics. Principal Davidson leaned forward. I do. I reviewed Zora's project assignments for this school year. She's worked alone on 7 of 9 group projects. The other 2 she was paired with students who were absent, making her the default option. Callahan started to speak, but the principal held up a hand. Mr. Brennan brought this to my attention Tuesday. I've spent 2 days reviewing policies, and I'm disturbed by what I found. We have patterns of exclusion targeting students from non-traditional families. Single parents, foster families, same-sex parents. Kids who don't fit the nuclear template getting othered in ways we've justified as pedagogically sound. Elijah felt vindication mixed with grief. He'd been right, but being right meant other children had suffered the same casual cruelty that had made Zora cry. What changes are you implementing? Principal Davidson pulled out a folder. New partnering policy effective immediately. Students choose their own partners or groups are assigned randomly. No more teacher discretion that creates patterns of exclusion. Additionally, we're implementing family diversity training for all staff, and I'm personally reviewing every classroom policy that makes assumptions about family structure. Mrs. Callahan looked like she wanted to argue, but something in the principal's expression stopped her. She nodded stiffly. I apologize to Zora. And to you, Mr. Brennan. I didn't realize my actions were harmful. Elijah met her eyes. Now you do. The question is, what you do with that knowledge. The meeting ended with promises and policies and the fragile hope that institutional change might actually stick. Elijah collected Zora from class, took her for ice cream even though it was 10:30 in the morning, and told her what had happened. So, I get to pick my partners. Now, you get to pick your partners. She considered this while working on a cone of chocolate chip. That's good. But Papa, some kids might still laugh. Policy doesn't change what people think. She was right. 8 years old, and she understood that written rules and social reality existed in different dimensions. You're right, but policy gives you protection. If someone mocks you for your family, you can report it, and the school has to respond. That's not nothing. It's something. It's a start. They finished their ice cream. Elijah drove Zora back to school for the afternoon session, watched her walk into the building with shoulders squared and head high. She was learning. Not just how to survive, but how to fight back, how to demand better, how to exist in the world without apology. His phone rang. Felicia Torres. Mr. Brennan, I wanted to give you a heads up. The story runs tomorrow. Front page of the Metro section. I'm sending you an advance copy for fact-checking. The email arrived while she was still on the phone. Elijah opened it, saw the headline, Single Parents Fight Couples-Only Culture in Boston's Social Institutions. Below it, a photo from Elise's wedding. Not the ceremony or the dancing, but a candid shot someone had captured of Table 18. Elijah and Vivian sitting alone while couples filled the frame around them. The isolation was visceral, the exclusion undeniable. It's a good piece. Fair. Accurate. But I want you to be prepared for response. Stories like this generate strong reactions. What kind of reactions? Support from people who've experienced similar exclusion. Backlash from people who think you're oversensitive. Media requests from other outlets wanting to cover the story. Possibly professional impact depending on how your client base responds. Elijah thought about his furniture business, the clients who hired him for custom work, the way reputation mattered in creative fields. I understand. Thank you for the warning. One more thing. Harborview's ownership contacted me. They're considering a public statement about their policy changes. It would be good optics for them, validation for you. Are you comfortable being named in their statement? As long as it's truthful, I'll make sure it is. The call ended. Elijah sat in his truck outside Zora's school, reading the article Felicia had written, seeing his life reduced to documented incidents and direct quotes, and a narrative about systematic exclusion that was both accurate and incomplete because no story could capture the full weight of 4 years disappearing. But it was something. It was his voice, Vivian's voice, Elise's voice, speaking truth that had been whispered or swallowed for too long. The responses started before the article even published. Felicia must have sent advance copies to sources because Elijah's phone began filling with messages Thursday evening. Some from people he barely knew, others from strangers who'd somehow gotten his number. A woman named Patricia from his church. I had no idea you were struggling with this. I'm so sorry. A former colleague from his architecture days. Saw the Globe piece. Proud of you for speaking up. 3 potential clients canceling consultations with vague excuses about changing timelines and budget constraints. The math of consequence. For every voice of support, a door closing. For every validation, a professional relationship suddenly cooling. Elijah tracked it all with the same documentation instinct that had started this, creating a new note file labeled Aftermath. Vivian called at 9 p.m. Are you seeing the response? All of it. Support and backlash in roughly equal measure. My firm got contacted by 2 clients today, one praising them for employing someone willing to challenge discrimination, one suggesting they might want to reconsider my role on their project since I'm clearly difficult to work with. Her voice carried exhaustion that Elijah recognized intimately. Is it worth it? Ask me again in 6 months. Right now I'm too close to know. Friday morning, the article published. Elijah's phone became unusable by 7 a.m., constant notifications from social media platforms he barely used, email flooding with messages from journalists and advocates, and people sharing their own stories of exclusion. Zora read the article at breakfast, lips moving slightly as she worked through vocabulary above her grade level. Papa, you're famous. I'm documented. She looked up from the newspaper, expression serious beyond her years. Are you scared? Every second. But I'm also proud. Does that make sense? Zora nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world to be terrified and proud simultaneously. Mama used to say brave doesn't mean not scared. Brave means scared and doing it anyway. The invocation of Miriam felt different now, less like reopening a wound and more like accessing strength that had always been there, waiting for him to remember it existed. Your mama was right about a lot of things. The weekend brought a different kind of response. 3 venues contacted Elijah asking for consulting work on accessibility and inclusive policies. A law firm reached out about a potential class action against institutions with discriminatory practices. A local parents group invited him to speak at their next meeting about advocating for non-traditional families. But also, 2 clients officially terminated contracts. A lumber supplier who'd given him preferential pricing suddenly required payment up front. A colleague he'd known for a decade called to say he admired what Elijah was doing, but couldn't afford to be associated with someone making waves because his own client base was conservative and wouldn't understand. Elijah sat in his garage Sunday evening, not working on furniture but just existing in the space that had been his refuge for 4 years. The rocking chair he'd been refinishing sat complete on the workbench. He'd finished it Saturday without consciously deciding to, just picked up the brush and applied the final coat of finish and acknowledged that it was done. Zora appeared in the doorway. Are you hiding again? No. Just thinking. About what? About how everything changed in 1 week. About whether changing things made them better or just different. Zora came to stand beside him, small hand finding his. Mrs. Patterson called Mama a agitator once. I heard her tell Mrs. Kim that Mama was always stirring things up, making people uncomfortable with questions about why things were the way they were. I remember. Your mama didn't like that word. She told me later that agitator was just another word for someone who wouldn't accept bad systems. She said if being comfortable meant accepting injustice, she'd rather be uncomfortable. Elijah looked down at his daughter, this small person carrying forward Miriam's legacy in ways he hadn't recognized until now. She was right. Comfort is overrated. So you're not hiding? I'm resting. There's a difference. Monday brought the venue ownership's public statement, released through their website and social media with language Elijah suspected Felicia had helped craft. They acknowledged past practices had caused harm, committed to comprehensive policy changes, framed it as proactive evolution rather than responding to pressure. The statement named Elijah as a consultant on accessibility improvements, Vivian as an advisor on inclusive event planning. It positioned Harbor View as industry leaders in recognizing and correcting systematic exclusion. The irony wasn't lost on Elijah. An institution he'd threatened with regulatory consequences was now using his name to burnish their reputation. But the policy changes were real, the training scheduled, the commitment documented. Take the win. That's what Vivian said when they spoke Monday afternoon. Even imperfect wins move us forward. Tuesday, Elijah returned to work, a furniture commission for a client who'd read the article and specifically wanted to support him. Wednesday, he met with the parents group, told his story to 23 people in a community center basement, and watched recognition dawn on faces of parents who'd been experiencing the same patterns without language to name them. Thursday, he got an email that changed the trajectory of everything that came after. From Boston Architecture Excellence Awards Committee. Subject: Nomination for Community Impact Design Award. Mr. Brennan, we're reaching out regarding your recent advocacy work around inclusive public spaces and accessibility. The committee would like to consider you for our Community Impact Design Award, which recognizes architects who use their expertise to address social justice issues. Would you be willing to submit a portfolio of recent work for consideration? Elijah read the email 3 times, looking for the catch. The Community Impact Design Award was prestigious, career-defining, the kind of recognition that opened doors he'd thought permanently closed when he'd left architecture to become a furniture maker. He called Vivian first. They want to give me an award for fighting with a wedding venue. They want to recognize you for using architecture to challenge systematic exclusion. There's a difference, is there? Yes. One makes it sound petty, the other makes it sound like what it actually is. Justice work. He drafted a response that night, sitting at his kitchen table with Zora asleep upstairs and the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The portfolio he submitted included documentation of Harbor View's code violations and planned remediations, design proposals for inclusive event spaces, policy recommendations for institutions wanting to move beyond couple-centric planning. But he also included something else, sketches for a community center designed specifically for diverse families, single parents, foster families, grandparents raising grandchildren, spaces that assumed no particular family structure but accommodated all of them. The project wasn't real yet, just drawings and ideas, and the hope that recognition might lead to funding, might lead to building something that mattered. 6 weeks later, standing on a stage holding a trophy that caught light in fractured rainbows, Elijah understood that the real award wasn't crystal. It was Zora in the front row believing her father was someone worth being proud of. It was Vivian beside her, proof that fighting back created community rather than isolation. It was knowing that 3 months ago he'd been counting steps to emergency exits, and now he was counting possibilities instead. 8 months ago, I walked into a wedding alone. The ballroom stilled, 300 people waiting. I sat at the last table in the back. I counted 12 steps to the emergency exit. I was ready to disappear. He paused, found Zora's face in the front row. Then a woman I'd just met stood up in front of 180 people and said 3 words that I didn't know I needed to hear. Vivian smiled, understanding. She said, "Look at me," not as a demand for attention, but as a redistribution of scrutiny. She took the weight of judgment off my shoulders and put it on her own. She showed me that visibility doesn't have to be punishment, that taking up space is a right, not a privilege we earn by conforming. He looked at the trophy in his hands. This award isn't mine alone. It belongs to every single parent who's been made to feel less than. Every widow and widower treated like broken remnants of a coupled world. Every child who's learned that their family structure makes them a target for mockery or exclusion. His voice caught. He pushed through. I didn't change the world. I changed my corner of it. My daughter will change her corner. And maybe, if enough of us change our corners and refuse to accept systems that make us smaller, the whole world shifts. The applause started before he finished, building like a wave. But Elijah barely heard it. His attention was on Zora, standing now, gap-toothed smile, bright with pride, and something else. Permission. To be big. To take up space. To exist without apology. He descended from the stage into embraces and congratulations and business cards from people wanting to discuss projects and partnerships, but he moved through them toward his daughter, toward the person who'd started all of this by refusing to let him hide. You were bigger than the sky tonight, Papa. So were you, baby. So were you.